A. Sethu Madhavan, popularly known as Sethu, is a Malayalam fiction writer. He has published more than 30 books. Sethu won the Kendra Sahitya Academy Award in 2007 for the work Adayalangal. He received the Kerala Sahitya Academy Awards in 1978 for Pidi Swapnangal and in 1982 for Pandavapuram, and the Vayalar Award for Adayalangal in 2005. He also served as the chairman of the South Indian Bank. Sethu was born in Chendamangalam, a village in Ernakulam district of Kerala, in the year 1942. At the age of 18, he took his bachelor's degree in physics. He joined the banking profession as a probationary officer in the State Bank Group. Sethu began his professional career at a very young age, which took him to various parts of the country. This phase of his life was instrumental in shaping his literary sensibilities and can be seen in many of his literary works. In 2012, he took over as the chairman of the National Book Trust, New Delhi. In a literary career spanning over 4.5 decades, Sethu wrote over 18 novels and 21 collections of short stories. Many of his novels and stories have been translated into many Indian languages like Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Marathi. Some of his literary works have been translated into English and other foreign languages. 4 of his novels have been made into films, including the much acclaimed Pandavapuram, which was also made in Bengali, titled Nirakar Chhaya. His latest work is Alia, one of the path-breaking novels in Malayalam, which came out in the year 2013.
Sethu had a wide variety of writings, ranging from short stories to a wide and a diverse variety of novels. He also was meandering through several pathways in his own career. Usually we have a tendency to regard the idea of modernism in conjunction with the Western modernism. But often there is a debate which recently has popped up, which is critiquing the same idea that we are not modern in that sense. How do we locate modern Indian writing in the context of the Western modern writing or even the colonial modernity which we have adhered?
It's a very, I would say, basically, I am not an academic, to be very frank. I am a writer, a creative writer. All along, I don't know how modern are we in the Indian context. See, basically, in my period when I started writing in the mid-60s, perhaps we didn't have that kind of a models in India, and we never claimed that we are modern writers. Perhaps we were looking at the Indian predicament from a different angle, I would say. What exactly is the new India, emerging India? Because as a person who was born before independence, we were all, we grew up with a kind of hope that this country, a new emerging country, a new republic, how it would look like for the youngsters of that period. Perhaps in this mid-60s there was a wave where there is some kind of disillusionment among the youth, which perhaps you could link to what is happening abroad during the modernist painting or writing or acting or what sort of things, all sorts of things. At that time, to a certain extent, the writers and artists in India would have been influenced. I think it was not very clear, but definitely that kind of influence was there. But as far as my writing was concerned, although the existentialist way of writing was very popular at that time, I was not enamored by that. I was rather, I tried to tread my own path, my writing was too Indian, I would say, because I was basically very much into the Indian milieu, because we all grew up on the Indian classics, Indian itihasas, our kavya culture and all that. To that extent, I was not swayed by the so-called modernist way of thinking at that point of time.
Exactly. But at the same time, you wanted to create your own pathway, a breakthrough in your own writings, particularly in the stories, ever since you published your first story, which came in 1967,
Yeah.
To a wide plethora of stories which are before us, which are translated into many European as well as the Indian languages. But what struck me particularly in your stories is the aspect that there is always a thrust of the region which is constantly popping up. And now this region has become a major part of the debate of nationalism, region versus the nation. Yes. So do you want to locate yourself as a person who is completely entrenched with the regional inputs and outputs?
Obviously, because see, I draw my strength from my own moorings, because I was born in a village, I was groomed in a village, and thereafter I moved into the cities, took up jobs in many places, traveled all over India, all over the world. Now, after my entire career, professional career, I am back in a village. So it's a full circle. Basically, the thing is that, see, our villages had a distinct culture of our own, particularly Kerala villages. As you know, the terrain as such is totally different from what you see in other parts of India, and that has been our strength. And the kind of stories, the fairy tales, the folk tales we heard at that time, the myths, the legends, and it was a part of us, part of our growing up. And to that extent, as far as my writing is concerned, because I have been writing for nearly half a century by now, I have never tried to repeat myself. See, you are talking about the stories, and I was always trying to rediscover or reinvent myself and innovate myself, because I get bored very easily. If I get bored with my own writing, then how do you expect me to, the readers will tolerate me? To that extent, I always try to find out new ways of expressing myself. See, basically, we are all trying to look at the human predicament from different points of view. Now, it's only the question of how exactly you can approach that situation and try to create or recreate what exactly you want to convey. And there are limitations, but still we are trying our level best to come out of it.
Fantasy is often one of the major elements in one of most of your stories.
Yeah.
You create fantasy in an entirely different way compared to the other modern writers in India, particularly from other languages. Your creation of fantasy to a certain extent is quite inward. And what are the pulls of this fantasy? Are the regional experiences and the folk tales and folklores play very crucial role in the construction of a fantasy? Or do you want to create fantasy as a trope which is totally different from other Indian writers who write in other languages?
I won't say that I had that kind of fascination towards fantasy, or it came automatically. There are a couple of reasons for it. The generations before us, there were realists, because with a lot of committed bent of mind. Then thereafter came the, I would say, the sentimental kind of writing, which was very poetic, and they had huge following. Then in the mid-60s, when we all started writing, I perhaps felt, whatever I want to convey, what are the tools available for me? When I thought, perhaps the realistic way of writing, although it had its own strengths and all, perhaps I thought, I may not be able to convey whatever I want to say using realistic way of writing, that kind of a tool. For example, if I want to enter the minds of into the depth of a mind of a woman character, perhaps if I portray it in a realistic way, I won't be able to convey whatever I want to say. So, if you are treading the path where I think particularly in the case of Pandapuram, when main woman character, she is a kind of woman who has been deserted by her husband, and she doesn't know why I have been thrown out like this, like a I would say unusable piece of cloth or whatever it is. So in that context, I thought, I have to follow her thought process, travel through her mindscape, and perhaps for that, only fantasy will help me. So in that Pandapuram, it was not pure fantasy. I am not very much after pure fantasy. It is a mix of real and unreal world. This lady's mind moves from the real to unreal, and in that process, she is confused herself. To certain extent, she confuses the readers also and the writer also.
Exactly.
So that's what I was trying to.
Let us, since you mentioned Pandapuram, one of your major novels which got translated into several Indian languages. And recently into some of these, the European languages as well.
Yeah.
We'll get into Pandapuram. What I often felt is the fact that in Pandapuram there is a woman-centric as well as a liberating force of woman, which to a certain extent is carried to the other novels which are written after that, particularly in the context of Niyogam, and even a text like Atayalangal.
Yes.
In all these novels, the question of woman becomes the center, which so far may not be an aspect which is carefully examined by theoreticians and thinkers or whatever. But at the same time, I have noticed the fact that this woman is not a static woman. She is malleable.
Absolutely.
She is malleable to a lot of changes. She is susceptible also at times, and also she is receptive. So, is that a particular track in your writing which makes woman an element of resistance and recuperation?
No, I won't say. I won't say. I don't think it is deliberate. In fact, I couldn't. I didn't have a real character when I drew the sketch of
Mapping,
Devi in Pandapuram. You see, basically, it is a mix of many such women I had met and I had known about, and particularly, have we ever tried to analyze the mindscape of such an strange woman and the kind of torment and the kind of no, she's confused absolutely. See, where have I gone wrong? What wrong thing I have done? Why I am treated like this? Not only by her husband, her family members, the community, the society at large, they all look at her with suspicion. So always woman is a soft target. See, in the subsequent women characters also, I have tried to emphasize this point. In the current globalized situation, the soft targets are the soil and the woman, because the avarice of the man perhaps always targets the soil. Okay, grab
Absolutely.
it. This is what we have seen in India. Grabbed it. And as far as the woman is concerned, you look at her body. Absolutely, you look at her body. And in that kind of a situation, perhaps women characters have been very. I was fascinated by some of the women characters. I would say I have created nearly 6 women characters who are all distinct in different way. You are referring to Adayalangal. See, Pandapuram, that main character Devi is a school teacher in a small village, whereas in the case of Adayalangal, which for which I got the Sahitya Academy Award, Vailar Award and all that, the central character is a executive, because there, in 30-35 years, to certain extent, I feel the average Indian woman has been empowered to a certain extent due to better education, and to that extent they are able to stand up to situations, and they won't accept defeat that easily, and there is a visible change despite whatever is happening today. So to that extent, within 30-35 years, I felt now there is no point in going back to the village and portray the kind of women I was familiar with it during my younger days. There is a class of women who are into different kind of professions. Some of them have become very bold leaders, then executives. To that extent, their world is becoming wider. So I thought, as a writer, it's my responsibility to look at the new emerging face of the Indian woman. That's what I was trying to do.
Could you tell us something about the reception of the translation, particularly Pandapuram into other Indian languages, and what can be the reception? What can be its reception when the the German as well as the French translations do turn up?
Now, you see, it depends, and it's very tough task, I would say. Okay, you know a couple of languages, or 3 or 4 languages, reasonably well, but how do you know how far it has been truthful to the
Certainly,
original
the
text?
politics,
Now, this is a risk a writer takes, because I used to tell my translators, because it has gone into 8 languages and a couple of European languages, then English. I used to tell them, you can take some liberty with my text. I am sure that no other writer will say that. I don't want a literal translation. As far as the English translation was concerned, at least I could read it. And the Hindi also, to a certain extent, I could read and understand. But what about foreign language? We are at the receiving end. But basically, ideally, there has to be a meeting of minds between the writer and the translator. But it depends on your luck. This is the case with all the writings all over the world, where the translator is absolutely at the mercy, the writer is at the mercy of the translator. But again, provided if you have a good editor, to certain extent they may be able to handle it in a better way.
Yeah, Pandapuram also was made into a very successful film into Bengali.
Yeah.
I was fascinated at the reception. In Bengal, it got a tremendous reception. Maybe if you have a lot of crisscross currents with the Malayali culture with the Bengali culture. While getting into the whole question of the film also is a text. A text or a written script to certain extent is made into another text. Film also becomes a kind of a text. So could you link what can be the possibilities that made the film a successful venture?
I think that's a very interesting question. In fact, that director Ashish Abikundak, he was teaching in a university in America, and he's a youngster at that. And when he approached me that he would love to do a film on Pandapuram based on the English translation, I was a little bit surprised. I said, better don't venture into that. It's not easy. Somebody did a film in Malayalam. It didn't come up to my expectations.
Yes.
So then he said, I want to approach the central subject from a different point of view. That means it won't be a ditto transcreation, or I don't want to do a film entirely on whatever you have written in the original text. I may have to look at a different model. So I said, I am very happy about it. You see, again I told him, you can take some liberty with the text, but please do send the script to me. So here again he said, you are the only person in the world who will give the director the freedom to approach the novel the way you want. I said, we are operating in different medium, and we are representing 2 different languages, different cultures, different peoples, but still the novel would have struck him somewhere.
Yeah, so you gave the director the maximum freedom.
Yes, yes.
Extravagance of freedom to explore the
Yes,
text.
yes.
Into
So
the
that's
medium of
precisely
film.
what he did. You see, in the end, he plays the central character. In the novel, it was railway station.
Yeah.
In the film, he plays the character in front of the Hooghly River,
Yeah.
below the Howrah Bridge.
Yeah.
So to that extent, it gives a lot of visual dimensions to whatever you want to project. And he made some changes, and he sent me the text and the one-line treatment and all. So I felt he has taken too much of a liberty, and to that extent, some of my readers were not happy with the whole thing. But I told him, Baba, you have done a reasonably good job. And it was premiered in Locarno Festival at that time. It was well accepted, and it was shown in a few international festivals where the response was good. But unfortunately, this could not be censored in India. That is a normal thing which happens. And one major festival in Kerala, they refuse to accept this.
Oh, right.
You see, this is how it happens, because this is Indian way of looking at
Censorship happens at also.
now,
Not
it is
censorship
not
really.
censorship. Those who had read the original Pandavapuram,
right.
they felt, this was not faithful to the original thing.
Yeah.
See, this is precisely
Yeah.
the conflict. So I tell them this is a different medium.
Yeah.
Cinema is a different medium. If he is able to capture the spirit of the novel, and he has put it like that, inspired by the
Oh, right.
by
right.
Sethu Madhavan's Pandavapuram.
right.
It's not a ditto Pandavapuram.
Now there is a tussle which is going on. If we look at global writing at a wider dimension, we have a whole range of writers, right from Mario Vargas Llosa, the Peruvian writer, who both at times is a regional as well as a national writer. And there are other writers like Philip Roth, an American writer who who always looks at an apocalyptic pattern. English writers like Julian Barnes, who look at, and also Canadian writers like Margaret Atwood, who look at the dystopic aspects. And we are having Amitav Ghosh, who is a transnational writer, who doesn't want to remain within the narrow precincts of some post-colonial writing or whatever. Seen in this context, what are the parameters by which the Indian writing to certain extent is not widely translated, and it is not widely accepted and read by the world outside? For instance, we are reading all these texts, whether it is Latin American, Caribbean, or whether it is European. Of course, we are familiar with almost all the English as well as the American writing. But when we go there, our literature's Indian writing to a certain extent, I have a feeling it hasn't crossed the border. And what are the forces which are at play?
I would say it's actually it's true, and it's very sad also. Garcia Marquez is more known in Malayalam than in many other countries.
Exactly.
There are many who think that he is a Malayalam writer. No, you see, that it is our sort of, in one way, the two ways of looking at it. This type of give and take or going beyond the boundaries has enriched our language. See, we have taken quite a lot from Bengali, Hindi,
Right.
and French, Russian, Latin American, everything. One way, that way, this one-way traffic has really enriched the language. But as far as the Indian writing is concerned, we feel so sad, because I have participated in many such conferences abroad. I was surprised that practically very little is known about our prominent writers, apart from Sharat Chandra or Bankim Chandra, or up to present generation Mahashada Devi or Anand Murthy, M.T. Vasudevan. It's so sad. But I don't know what prevents our people or the literary critics projecting our kind of writing. Even now there is a kind of spat between the Indian writers in English and the so-called writers in the Indian language, because I am averse to this usage regional language. No, these are all Indian languages. So there's a lot of conflict happening. But the real Indian literature, you can see, or it lies only in the Indian languages.
Right.
Be it Marathi or Bengali or Tamil or Hindi or whatever it is. So, it's a high time that we all try to project it abroad.
I agree. If memory and place have always been a very problematic aspect. They are having a problematic aspect in most of your short stories, and I would say as well as in your novels. The struggle of man against power is a struggle of memory against forgetting. That is what Kundera said. But when we get into some of your texts like Atayalangal, for instance, the space which you create or the place which you create, like Meenakshi Palayam, all right, a space where a few characters live either in imagination or they try to venture into the corners of imagination. Is it because you find a necessity that the existing places need to be negated and parallel spaces and places need to be created?
No, I would say in the case of Meenakshi Palayam, I wanted to convey a very specific message. The way I was telling you, about soft targets being women and the land,
right,
as the soil. That is a small Tamil Nadu village, a cane growers village, where a sugar factory was set up, and the entire cane fields were destroyed. and suddenly when this, it was supposed to be a very sweet place, the fragrance of the cane plants, and suddenly when the factory was put up there, the whole area was polluted, water was polluted, soil was polluted, the entire atmosphere was polluted. So, this is the kind of things you see when we move away from the agrarian economy to the new industrial economy. A colony was set up there, and the kind of pollution which you have seen in the land and the air and the water, now that percolates into the minds of the people over there. So, the Meenakshi Palayam suddenly becomes a small colony, it becomes an industrial center, and gone were the days when the people were very straightforward, simple, innocent. Their lives also changed. This is what I wanted to
convey in this particular text. Let us get into another important aspect. This is something concerned with the space again, which properly figures up. And of late, if you are looking at your collection like A Guest for Arundhati, there is a story in that, Her Corner of Earth, where you move a character to a very global plane precisely because this central woman's, the children are living abroad, and the tension which aging and also the youth which ripes the fruits of the youth abroad are having. And this woman is around 82 years old, and her inner tensions and the rest of the things. So, is it a conscious attempt to make or venture into a plane of the global problematic of aging, which gradually is seeping like anything in almost all the villages, and most of the villages are having women as well as men who are aged, who look into the darkness, where their children and grandchildren are either settled abroad or in other parts of the country.
It's so common in the present day Kerala atmosphere. There are any number of families where the children are all abroad, either in America, Europe, or the Middle East. So, particularly those who are in America and Europe, they live in a totally different atmosphere and totally different world. Very rarely do they come home. That was perhaps once in 3 or 4 years. And so, the parents, particularly the mother always feel isolated, and I would say we never try to analyze the thought process in her mind. Although all kinds of comforts are given to them, they long for something, they miss something, whether it is the grandchildren or the kind of warmth that they want from the family as such. So, here this old lady gets a chance to go to America to meet her children and all that. And when ultimately she spends a few days over there, then suddenly she feels suffocated. She wants to come back. Again, she has, this is something which you see in the old age, pull between her own moorings and the kind of new atmosphere with which she's least familiar with, and suddenly she feels certain daily routines with which she had she's connecting herself. I think I am missing so many, although it may look very ordinary to us or to her children. So, she is longing for that thing. So, this is something which is a common sight in Kerala, because old age homes are coming up, because what is called, I would say, longevity is another issue. So, a 80-year-old woman is normally seen as a middle-aged lady, and you don't look at them as a very old woman or something like that. So, in this setups, it's a totally different social situation where new problems are coming up.
Okay.
Although all the comforts are given, they long for something else.
There is a self-inflicted pain, or I would say a crave for justice in some of your stories. And one particular story which I had at the back of my mind is, though a lot of critics have talked about this story, The Noon, Ucha, that it's a kind of a fantasy. I would like to relate the story at a different plane, that there is a self-inflicted pain which is coming up constantly. It's not venturing into or moving into or veering into a pure plane of fantasy. does it mean that, and I have a whole set of other stories with me also, which have a the notion of a self-inflicted pain which is coming up. And what does it signify? Does it signify a journey back to the womb, or does it signify some masochistic elements, if asking psychologically?
No, I don't want to go to that extent. See, when I wrote that story, I had again a lonely woman in my mind, and her son was
Right.
missing. He was a revolutionary, and she doesn't know where he is. And one day, a woman, a young girl, comes suddenly from nowhere with a small kid, and she tells the kid, "Come on, touch the feet of your grandma." Then only she is moved, and she did not know who it was and how come this her son met this girl, how he had a kid, and from nowhere suddenly a new world revolves in front of her eyes, and ultimately she starts feeling that I lost my son, and the end is very touching, and many readers have liked it, because when this girl and the grandchild moves away, I think the mother is really shaken. No, I think I'm unable to explain it beyond a point. But it was I really loved writing it, and when I read it after completing the story, I was moved myself. I think it's one of my favorite stories.
Let us come back to the last two texts, novels which you have written, Marupiravi and also Alia. These two novels belong to the category for me like a historiographic metafiction.
Absolutely.
Because there are interesting ways in which history and fiction gel together. But at the same time, sometimes when history stops, fiction has to speak.
Absolutely.
So, do you think this is a strategy which you want to follow in in your future writings?
Not really. As I told you right in the beginning, I never repeat myself. Because I always try to innovate and rediscover myself. So this was my first entry to the world of history, because I am not a historian, not even a student of history. So when I thought of writing Maruparavi, because this was again based on some of the facts which emerged during the recent excavations in a village called Pattanam, which is near my village, and it happens to be my father's village also. So there they have found out, they have got some very interesting finds through the excavations, where the Kerala History Council has done this, relating to some artifacts and some finds which are relating to the old Musiris port, which existed on the southern coast of India, western coast of India, about 2000 years back. And the history says that Musiris was one of the major ports and trade emporiums in the world, comparable to Alexandria on the Mediterranean. So there are any number of episodes, anecdotes relating to that in the history books and in the travelogues written by the travelers at that time, and in the Sangam literature in Tamil. So the Musiris episode was really fascinating to me. So really I spent nearly 4 to 5 years on studying these archives, interviewing people, interviewing historians, collecting materials. It was a massive job. For the first time, I ventured into this kind of writing. And initially, I was not very clear about the format in which I should portray this. And so I started writing. Then thereafter, I found it really exciting. Really, it's a totally new, refreshing experience to me, because basically I come from a village which has great historical past, where there is a place called Kotail Kovilagam, where atop the hillock there is a Vishnu temple, down below there is a Christian church, a Muslim mosque, and a synagogue, Jewish synagogue. Nowhere in the world we can see such a monument. All these things happened about 500 years back. So when we talk of communal harmony these days, the Raja at that point of time had that kind of a vision, and all these institutions came up with the support of the Raja.
Rajas.
So with that, I tried to portray that period with all the materials and wrote Marubaravi, and it was a great experience for me.
At the same time, when you look at history, I have noticed the fact that some of the historical major characters are either a Rajas or someone. You are not giving that kind of prominence to one particular personality taken from history, like some of the world famous writers have done, right from Victor Hugo. If you get into Garcia Marquez, he has talked about a dictator who lives in a magical realist way for 200 years, more than that, based on a Salvadorian dictator. But at the same time, that dictator becomes a part and parcel of the entire Latin American continent. So such important one particular moment of history is sidelined, but your approach toward history is to incorporate almost all sections of the society and to create a new history becomes an agency there.
When I tried to recreate that period, I couldn't zero in on one central character, because that is absolutely not relevant in such kind of a text, because basically the Mussiris port, where a lot of trade was happening, how it got evolved, and what kind of life the people used to live at that point of time. And I personally, I always believe, now always we talk of Arya, Dravids and all that, Dravidians and all that. But see, much before that, 2000 years back, when these Romans and Greeks used to come, and along with the monsoon wind, and spend around 3 months in that area, and after that they take the northeast monsoon winds and go back. I am sure that some type of mingling would have taken place. A new generation would have, or new generations would have come out of that. I am sure that this is something which has to be carried forward, taken forward by, I would say, historians or anthropologists. I don't know who are the experts, because this has to be analyzed. A new generation would have come out of this kind of linkages, or I don't know how to express it.
Right. All right. Could you finally tell us something about your new ventures into writing, as well as being a chairman of National Book Trust of India? Something you have to give to the world, perhaps.
As far as NBT is concerned, we have planned to bring out the classics of Indian language.
That's very good.
The classics of Indian languages, as I would say, condensed books for the students, or I would say for the children, and young adults. That's a target. See, for example, Premchand, Bankim Chandra, Tara Shankar, Prem, all our masters from all languages. We are working on that. I think after the World Book Fair is over, we have to work further on that. We have a plan to bring out, introduce the masters, because very little is known among the contemporary generation. There are very few children who know about Premchand or Sharat Chandra or Bankim Chandra, and so this is something we felt, this is our duty. So this is something we are working on. It's a big project.
Thank you very much, and it was indeed a great pleasure to be with Sethu, a celebrated Malayalam writer who has taken Malayalam writing and also his own other oeuvre of writing beyond the borders of simple regionalism. His own extravaganza into many areas and meanderings into other writings have indeed made us quite proud, and it was indeed, we were blessed to have Sethu with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.